In the previous video, we began looking at verse 309. And in this video, we're going to be looking at what's known as the false imagination, the Parikalpita. If you haven't listened to the previous video, then that was an introduction to this one, so you should really listen to the previous one first, because there's all sorts of caveats and preparing of the context here. In verse 309, it's mentioned that there are 10 kinds of this false imagination. Although in a footnote, Professor Suzuki says that in other editions of the sutra, there are 12 kinds mentioned. Now, in looking into this, it turns out that in the main body of the text itself, there are 12 kinds mentioned. Although, to be fair, it's actually 12 features of the false imagination. So whether that's the same thing or not, I don't know. But I think it's worth looking into this because it gives us a chance to dip into the main body of the Lankavatara Sutra and explore this a little more deeply. The false imagination is what keeps us from enlightenment. The false imagination is the discriminating mind. It's all these things which we constantly hook into in the belief that that is what is real. That all those things that we come up with in our thinking are how things actually are. So basically we're believing that how we imagine things to be is actually how things are. So let's have a look at this. It's in section 54. I'll just read out the whole text, and as usual I'll copy it into the notes below the video, and I'll put it into the video index, which you can find the link to in the notes below. So the Buddha's talking to Mahamati. Further, Mahamati, I will tell you about the various features of the false imagination, the Parikalpita, and when you and the Bodhisattva-Mahasattvas are well acquainted with each of them in its specific form, you will get away from discrimination. So it's this discrimination which we are almost constantly caught up in, which we need to identify. I gave an example of such a discrimination in the previous video, which I put into practice recently to quite striking effect. And seeing well and knowing the way of inner realization by noble wisdom, and also the ways of speculation by the philosophers, you will cast off discriminations such as grasped and grasping, and will not be induced to discriminate in respect to the multiple aspects of relativity-knowledge, as well as the forms of the false imagination. So this relativity-knowledge is what we relate to. It's the world out there that we relate to, which seems to have its own life going on. And there are aspects of it which we cling to and bits that we want to avoid. So this is the discrimination of grasped and grasping. And we've got this particular disposition that makes up who we are. This is who I am. I like this, I don't like that, I like her, I don't like him, all the rest of it. And of course this isn't just a mental thing, this is an emotional thing. When we talk about psychological disposition, we're not talking about a particular set of ideas. We're talking about an emotional attitude, our emotional stance with respect to everything that's going on, including with respect to our own thoughts even. We have a particular tone or a set of tones even. And most of the time we're not even aware of them. They're very deep. This is what we have to be looking at. This is what we have to be looking at as we read these verses, as we contemplate these verses. What are they digging up in ourselves? What are they bringing to light? Now, whether they bring to light anything or not, we'll just have to find out. What are the various features of the false imagination, Mahamati? They are the discriminations as regards, first of all, words, secondly, meaning, thirdly, individual marks, fourthly, property, fifthly, self-nature, sixthly, cause, seventhly, philosophical views, eighthly, reasoning, ninthly, birth, tenthly, no birth, eleventhly, dependence, and twelfthly, bondage and emancipation. These, Mahamati, are the various features of the false imagination. So these are all discriminations, and the Buddha goes into them in a bit more detail. Now, Mahamati, what is a discrimination of words? That is the becoming attached to various sweet voices and singing. This is a discrimination as regards words. Now, something here doesn't quite fit. And I think I know why the translations got this particular emphasis. It's because traditionally the Buddhist monk isn't supposed to attend dancing shows of popular entertainment. But this doesn't really fit in with the context here. We have to give some consideration to why this list begins with words, because we might often think of discrimination as with respect to sight, with what we see. We see things we like and we see things that we don't. But words goes a little bit deeper, doesn't it? Especially if you're searching for spiritual understanding. I think it's more likely that the sort of words that we have to be on our guard against here are seductive words. The words of the charismatic preacher, for example, or the charismatic speaker. Words that sell ideas. Words that sell beliefs. Such speakers often have a lyrical quality to their speech, which affects us like music does. It brings into certain clarity our feelings. It expresses things that we might not have been able to express ourselves. This is the seductive power of words. And the thing is, although it might feel very wonderful, it often leaves you wanting more. You want to get involved, not just with these words, but with the organisation or whatever, the cause that the speaker is promoting. We get focused out there. We get attached to out there. So this is what we have to watch out for. This is the particular discrimination. Looking for the truth out there. We don't want to go there. And it's words that are very powerful in taking us away from our own centre, our own sense of being. The second one was meaning. What is the discrimination of meaning? It is a discrimination by which one imagines that words rise depending on whatever subjects they express, and which subjects one regards as self-existent and belonging to the realisation of noble wisdom. So here it's a bit more obvious that we're talking about spiritual teachers. we're talking about spiritual teachers that have got a system. They've got a way of understanding that we want to be part of. And it's just as I was saying about these teachings, unless they help us to dig up and expose to the light certain aspects of our own emotional posturing with respect to existence, then they're no good. But what we often do is avoid that and focus out there on a wonderful system of beliefs which we believe is somehow real and we want to be part of. So this is a discrimination of meaning. What is the discrimination of individual marks? It is to imagine in whatever is denoted by words the multitudinousness of individual marks which are like a mirage, and clinging tenaciously to them, to discriminate all things according to these categories: warmth, fluidity, motility, and solidity. The thing about words is, we believe that they reflect something real. The physical world is out there, that's real. Words are attached to aspects of that world out there, so they refer to something real. I can touch it. It's real. This is solidity. I can move around in it. It's three-dimensional. It's real. This is motility. It's hard work. I struggle to get around. There's a struggle here. Things shift beneath my feet. This struggle is very real. This is the fluidity. Things moving around. Things in motion. There's warmth. Coziness. I can construct things so that I feel better. This is what we're caught up in all the time. In constructing things so we feel better, this leads us into the next one, which is to do with property. This is what we get involved in. We're taking our cue from so-called out there. We're taking our cue from the apparent out there and making our nest, keeping out the dangers. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't do this sort of thing. It's natural to preserve yourself and so on, but that's not the whole story. This is the discriminating mind, and we need to be aware when it's in operation, throw a light in it, and in doing so we're opening ourselves up to the possibility of liberation. But as long as we're caught up in this, as long as we believe that this is reality, then we've blocked the possibility of liberation. So here we are at the discrimination of property. It is to desire a state of wealth such as gold, silver and various precious stones. And I think in the modern context, winning the lottery. If only we could win the lottery. Well, I buy a lottery ticket now and again, and it's possible to see the seduction of contemplating what it's like to win. But I buy it online. It's just a couple of quick clicks and then I can forget about it. I don't think about winning it. In fact, it would be quite a big responsibility if I won it. I'd certainly not like to have to worry about money, but this is the discrimination of property once again. If I didn't have to worry about money, then I wouldn't be going out doing this minimum wage job, which has been a means of incredible insights for me. It's been a great opportunity for Zen practice. So over the last year doing this job, although it's been very uncomfortable, and this little boy that I mentioned in the previous video is totally up in arms about it, it's been a wonderful opportunity. Better than a year spent in a Zen monastery, I'm sure. So, this is property. The desire for security, coziness, and not having to bother. What is a discrimination of self-nature? It is to make discrimination according to the imaginary views of the philosophers in reference to the self-nature of all things, which they stoutly maintain, saying, "This is just it, and there is no other." Well, never mind the imaginary views of the philosophers, unless you want to understand everybody as being a philosopher, which is the case. Because this is what people say. This is it. You've just got to get on with it. This is it. This is reality. Earn your crust. Dog eat dog. Look after yourself and your own. That's all there is to it. So these are the views of the philosophers. These are the views of just about everybody. What is a discrimination of cause? That is, to distinguish the notion of causation in reference to being and non-being, and to imagine that there are cause signs. This is a discrimination of cause. And this is a belief that it's always been so. This is it, and it's always been like this, right back to the Big Bang, or to when God created the world, whatever thought system you subscribe to. We are part of this process, so that this idea of causation, of cause, reinforces that. It's always been going on, and it always will. So it locks us not just into this particular space, this very limited space, but it locks us into a very limited time as well. So to distinguish the notion of causation in reference to being and non-being, how can we relate to this? Well, again, we can relate to it in terms of making hay while the sun shines. You're going to die. Make the most of it while you can. Again, reinforcing the idea that this is it. You come from nothing and you're going to return to nothing. So what else is there? Get on with it. This is the so-called philosophers once again. What is the discrimination of philosophical views? That means getting attached to the philosopher's wrong views and discriminations concerning such notions as being and non-being, oneness and otherness, bothness and not bothness. You might actually look for an alternative to the worldview that is commonly held. And we get this in the ecological movement. We get it with people who are trying to approach things from a fresh point of view. And that's all fine, Don't want to knock it. But again, spiritually, we need to be careful. We don't want to be getting seduced by words again into other systems of belief. As enlightenment practitioner, any system of belief, any system of belief, whether it is about oneness or otherness, promising fruits beyond death or fruits in the future and all the rest of it, these are discriminations. ideas formed by the mind that we don't want to get seduced by either. When you're living in the world, you live in accordance with a particular viewpoint, and this is fine, you play the game. But as enlightenment practitioners, we realize it's a game and keep coming back to the reality of awareness again and again. What is the discrimination of reasoning? It means the teaching whose reasoning is based on the grasping of the notion of an ego substance and what belongs to it. And this reasoning is often takes the form of inference. We imagine that what's going on out there is the same as what's happening here. I am just one of those. So I should behave like one of those. All of these out there have their own reality. This is the ego substance. Doesn't matter whether it's people, animals, or inanimate objects. We believe that they've got their own reality. The teachings of the Lankavatara Sutra are telling us that this is no more true than the objects of a dream. So this is another discrimination that we use to reinforce the notion of a concrete external reality. What is the discrimination of birth? It means getting attached to the notion that things come into existence and go out of it according to causation. So this just follows on the idea that there's this big past behind us. There's an interest in these days in genealogy, tracing your ancestors, your forebears, no doubt encouraged by the access to online archives, birth records and so on, as if we're trying to extend ourselves back in time, reinforcing this idea that we're part of a lineage, trying to bolster up our sense of being in some ways. What is the discrimination of no birth? It is to discriminate that all things are from the beginning unborn, that the causeless substances which were not come into existence by reason of causation. Now, this is a difficult one to relate to personally, isn't it? I mean, are we talking about the Big Bang here? Somehow there was nothing, and then there was something. This is the story of the Big Bang, isn't it? How does this affect us on a personal level, though? Our memories only take us back so far. We've got an earliest memory. So for most of us, there's a point at which we were nothing. It's just an imagined point, of course. But again, we put our eventual existence down to this process that began with our parents, but goes back to their parents and their parents' parents and so on. So in this way we're building up an emotional attitude. It's deep down, it's perhaps something that we're not conscious of, but perhaps at some point, at some level, we're struggling to hold back the dark, hold back the nothingness. Perhaps at some level we're even terrified of it. What is the discrimination of dependence? It means the mutual dependence of gold and the filament, which is made of gold. There's this idea again of development. We've got the gold and then it becomes a filament or a bracelet of some kind. So there's this idea that we must continually develop, progress, refine. You get this in the ordinary understanding, but you get it in the spiritual understanding as well. And we get the belief that we're creating something different, something new. But as enlightenment practitioners, we don't get seduced by such a discrimination. What is the discrimination of bondage and emancipation? It is like imagining that there is something bound because of something binding, as in the case of a man who, by the help of a cord, ties a knot or loosens it. So this is relevant to those of us who are interested in spiritual liberation. If we believe in liberation, then we believe that we are bound. What must we do to become unbound? What must we do to become free? And then this takes us right back to the beginning. We look out for words which have this promise, words which have this promise of liberation. And what happens is we get bound by the promise of liberation. Let me just read the last paragraph of section 54. These Mahamati are the various features of the false imagination to which all the ignorant and simple-minded ones cling, imagining that things are or are not. Those attached to the notion of relativity are attached to the notion of multitudinousness of things rising from the false imagination. It is like seeing varieties of objects depending on Maya, but these varieties, thus revealing themselves, are discriminated by the ignorant as something other than Maya itself, according to their way of thinking. Now, Mahamati, Maya and varieties of objects are neither different nor one. If they were different, various objects would not have Maya for their cause. If Maya were one with various objects, there would be no distinction between the two. But as there is the distinction in these two, Maya and varieties of objects are neither one nor different. For this reason, you and the Bodhisattva-Mahasattvas should never give yourselves up to the notion of being and non-being. So this gets down to these realities again. There is what we can call a conventional reality. One spiritual teaching will tell us it's all illusion. It's not, although what it promises is illusion. And it's these promises that fuel our discrimination. It's these promises which incline us to invest our emotions in what is going on apparently out there. As enlightenment practitioners, we see it as uniform, as samsara, as empty of promise. And we come back to our own sense of being. We come back to awareness. And if this seems like not much of a trade-off, then it means you're not coming back to awareness. It means you're bringing some baggage along, which is quite good because it gives you a chance to look at it and to see what discriminations you're making. Because once you truly come back to awareness, you'll see then the breaking of your shackles. You'll see liberation happening. And you'll have, as verse 309 said, knowledge of tathata.